Stitches by Nick Kime. Butcher sluiced blood from the slab. Frothing, foaming, spilling this way and that, it took 3 buckets before the water had turned from pink to clear.
Dead,
he announced to no one in particular, a las wound to the corpse's throat, leaving no doubt as to the prognosis, and moved to the next slab. Butcher checked his chrono.
2,300 hours to the second.
He shrugged, mildly diverted. A soldier gaped up at him from the next cot. His eyes widened in hope when he saw the stylized brass caduceus of the Imperial Medicae pinned to Butcher's red-flecked coat. He reached for him, fingers grasping like a drowning man reaches for air, but Butcher deftly stepped away. The man clutched at his chest with his other hand, where a poorly wrapped dressing, dark with blood and other less salubrious fluids, had been bound.
This needs to come off,
Butcher muttered, adjusting the plug stuffed up his nostrils. Thrown, it was rank. Even the waft of watered-down counterseptic couldn't touch the stench. Firmly pressing down the man's flailing arm, Butcher picked up the surgical scissors and began to cut. The bindings were tight and tough. At least a decent corpseman like Wrenhouse had done a passable job of patching this poor unfortunate up. As he severed the bandage and gauze, Butcher fancied he recognized this one. Not the name. He never remembered their names, but their parts, their roles. He always remembered that. The pieces. He was good with pieces. A Vox operator, he thought. Young, too. Barely 20 Terran standard, barely a man at all. Part of the Valgast reinforcements sent to bolster the line, judging by the regimental insignia. He didn't know much about the war, cloistered as he had been in the Medicae ever since they had arrived, only that it had been raging for a long time. If the regular influx of wounded was any barometer, the breakthrough was about to happen any time soon.
Let's have a look then,
Butcher murmured, grunting with the effort of cutting at the wrappings. Whatever was beneath had thickened the last layer of bandage, hardening it like a crust. It was like shearing through flackboard.
Holy Emperor,
he breathed, exhaling in relief as he got through it. Even before he had gingerly pulled the cloth aside, Butcher knew the boy was as good as dead. That stench. Thrown, but it reeked. Trench rot had got in. And something else too. It was pupating in the exposed muscle mass, which was visible on account of the missing flesh and bone of his torso.
Emperor's mercy,
he hissed, recoiling as something beneath the skin caused it to undulate. Its passage a steady but slow-moving hump. The body convulsed hard, a heavy slam resonating against the table. Still the writhing persisted under the flesh. Butcher backed up a step, holding the scissors out in front of him, finding his own fear reflected in the boy's ever-widening eyes. The trooper's voice was a shallow croak.
Please. I can't help you,
Butcher rasped.
I can't.
Another convulsion racked the boy, sending tremors through the table, and now something was really pushing. Tiny fumaroles opened up in the skin, and the gory matter beneath, venting gas and particulate. Butcher didn't know from what. Transfixed by fear, he pulled up his surgical mask, fingers trembling, a desire to keep whatever was emerging from the boy's body from surging forth. Foam bubbled on the boy's lips. His back arched, his body a bridge between the 2 short ends of the medical slab. The carotid artery stuck out, thick and livid, in his neck. He was choking, a gelatinous bile bubbling up from his throat. Small black flecks like frog spawn floated in the mass. Butcher bumped into the slab behind him, the firmness of the metal and the brush of a cold, dead hand against his skin suddenly focusing his attention.
Flamer in here!
He bellowed.
Right bloody now!
His fingers found the alarm and pulled it hard. Then he scrambled back, eyes locked on the boy, a shuddering, bent-backed, claw-handed image of agony.
Holy Emperor, now!
He whimpered, too afraid to turn his back and using the gurney rail to guide him. He yanked at the alarm until it cracked apart and broke off. He barely took notice of the siren, so fixated was he upon the boy, who turned his head and gave Butcher a look of utter despair.
I'm sorry.
Butcher whispered, so quietly that he couldn't swear he had spoken at all. 3 guardsmen barreled into the Medicaid block a few moments later, a sergeant and a 2-strong team with a flamer rig.
Out! Out!
The officer shouted, seizing Butcher by the shoulder and dragging him back as the flamer team moved up.
Torch it!
An intense roar filled the block, the heat prickling the wiry hairs on Butcher's chin. Smoke spread everywhere. The wounded were choking on it. A couple of corpsemen had found their way in too, and were ferrying out the most able-bodied. The rest burned or suffocated to death. Butcher's last sight was of the boy's body wreathed in flame. A smudged brown outline remained, lurching and convulsing. As Butcher was bundled out of the block, he heard the very slightest suggestion of a shriek, like air escaping the narrow aperture of a balloon, just audible above the noise of the conflagration. Butcher returned to the Medicaid block 2 days later. It had been thoroughly cleansed, though he could still detect the faint aroma of burning flesh over the chemicals, like pig's rind and wax. He frowned, eyes narrowing at the rime of mold the ablution servitors had missed. It lurked in the tile grout, obstinate and irritating. He considered using his knife, but thought better of it. His patients would probably prefer clean instruments, at least for as long as he was able to keep them that way. He took in the room. 8 fresh slabs, sluice buckets at the ready. He took a drag on a low stick, pinched between 2 thin, trembling fingers. The boy's death. That had been a bad one. One of the worst. But the war drove on, and men needed stitching up and sending back to the line. Rather here with them than out there in the dirt and the horror. 2 more drags on the low stick, and Butcher relaxed. He crushed the stub beneath his boot, sweeping a grimy coat around his narrow frame, and prepared for the slaughter to come. It didn't keep him waiting long. Bodies lay everywhere in varying states of dismemberment. A heavy barrage had rolled up the line, tearing guardsmen into ruined meat. It had hit the Valgast worst. Most had died to the enemy ordnance. Those that hadn't ended up in the Medicaid block. Butcher didn't even know what they were fighting for, beyond the love and protection of the immortal God Emperor, of course. He had been shipped here like all the rest, assigned to the Medicaid block, and that was it. No sky, no earth, just whitewashed walls, tiles, and a poorly stocked refectory. He ate here, slept here, worked here, with the dead. That suited Butcher just fine. As he cut into the trooper in front of him, Butcher reflected that he badly needed a win. His episode with the boy had spoiled his already lowly reputation. Even to think on it still made him queasy. He scratched at the back of his neck for the umpteenth time. A rash was growing there from the continued attention. It itched like hell, but hurt to touch now. He'd overheard talk recently of shifting him out onto the line, and a corpseman like Renhouse being promoted up to Medicaid Primus and elbowing him out.
You'd like that, you swine,
he muttered, cutting into flesh. It was soft, yielding. It didn't judge him. Blood ran almost up to his armpits. He was so deep in the chest cavity, trying to tie off a bleed. After considerable effort, Butcher managed to clamp the vein and staunch the flow, but the trooper looked pale and weak. He wasn't breathing too well either, making tiny gasps for air. Then the breathing stopped altogether.
Throne!
Butcher started compressions, not knowing if it was the bleed or something else that was causing the problem.
Come on,
he urged.
I need this.
After a few minutes, he slumped back, exhausted. A blank pair of eyes regarded him from the gurney. And the dead man wasn't alone. No one brought into Butcher's care had lived. 7 dead. He knew he was incompetent. He had just thought he could convince the officers that he wasn't.
They're going to put me on the line. Holy throne, they are!
Trembling, he was reaching for a low stick tucked in his top pocket when he heard something rattle against a metal surgical dish. At first, he thought it was a survivor, and he turned desperately, performing a full 360-degree rotation of the room, trying to hook his lifeline. Nothing. Just dead eyes and slack expressions, lathered in blood. But then he heard it again. A wet slap, like something soft hitting something hard.
What in the warp?
Butcher nosed around, feeling the old fear rising, one hand clasped firmly around a scalpel. The slap came again. And this time he found the source. Hiding behind the leg of a gurney, discarded and forgotten, was a glistening red human lung. It flopped like a landed fish, and Butcher sprang back, reviled and fascinated at the same time.
How is this possible?
He asked aloud. It looked healthy, and he realized with horror, it breathed. Ever so gently, like it belonged to someone who was sleeping. He shrank back, immediately disturbed, and reached for the alarm. Then stopped. Nothing stirred in the Medicaid block, except for Butcher's shallow breathing and the gentle motion of the lung. He felt a sudden compulsion to pick it up and examine it. Shuffling forwards again, he reached out with tentative fingers, glad for his surgical gloves. It was warm to the touch, even through the thin rubber, the slow and impossible susurration of breath, just audible as the lung inflated and deflated. The lobes looked healthy, the main bronchus intact. He regularly harvested the viable body parts from the men he couldn't save and housed them in a secure locker against the Medicaid wall, each one kept in preservative fluid. There were a lot. Butcher had excised several organs and left them in a surgical dish next to the patient. This one had slipped off the slab somehow. But that didn't explain how it was still functioning, though. He regarded the softly pulsing organ in his hand, curious and repulsed all at once. Then he looked at the dead man lying on the gurney. The trooper's body still lay open, its inner heat somehow cooler under the Medicaid's dull overhead lamps. A thought, an insidious little idea, infiltrated his mind. Setting the healthy lung down on a fresh surgical dish, Butcher opened the trooper up. His lung looked bad, punctured and deflated. Butcher wasn't sure how he'd missed it, and then he remembered how he was a poor surgeon, and that this was the only explanation needed. Nevertheless, he got to work removing the bad lung, and then, with a deftness he had never before displayed or knew he had, he transplanted the healthy lung. Butcher then proceeded to stitch the trooper back up, and waited. Nothing happened, and the sudden realization that he was expecting it to pulled Butcher from this moment of insanity.
What the hell am I doing?
He rubbed his forehead, forgetting he was covered in blood and smearing it over his face. He scowled.
Damn it!
Shuffling over to the wash basin, he removed his gloves and scrubbed his hands and face, annoyed at making such a stupid error and considering that he might be genuinely losing his mind. He was drinking too much. A nip here and there to steady his frayed nerves had become half a bottle, and then a habit. He stopped the meager water flow and toweled off his hands and face. Then he leaned against the basin, arms locked and braced, head down. Something was wrong with him. He wondered if seeing the boy, that horrible, horrible death, had marked him in some way. And it was only now that the effects of that experience were beginning to manifest. Alone and isolated in the Medicaid for hours, sometimes days on end, it was no wonder he was finally going insane. He wondered how long he could go on fooling the others that he was both capable and of sound mind, before they caught him and carted him off to the commissariat or worse. He exhaled a deep breath, then heard the sound reciprocated a few feet away. Butcher whirled around, stray water globules studding his face and giving him the appearance of a man in a fever sweat. The dead trooper's finger twitched. Just a last tremor of nerves, Butcher told himself, heart suddenly thumping. But then the corpse shuddered, like a ripple of electricity was rushing through the body. The chest heaved, and there came a gasp, a definite lurch for air. The trooper was breathing. Slow at first, but with increasing confidence and vigor. He moved again, and Butcher gave an involuntary squeal of shock. Then the man lifted himself up off the slab, stitched up, half butchered, but alive.
Medic?
The trooper asked, blinking, a hand slipping down to the roughness of his torso.
Am I all right?
Yes,
Stammered Butcher.
you are, son.
He added more confidently.
Can I fight?
Butcher slowly nodded.
Report to the Munitorum Overseer and return to the line.
Butcher caught a glimpse of the ident tag still hanging around the trooper's neck.
Grumman.
Trooper Grumman nodded.
I will, Doc.
He swung his legs over the edge of the gurney, barefoot and only wearing the bottom half of his fatigues, but brimming with vim and purpose.
For the Emperor,
He said, throwing a fervent Aquila salute Butcher's way as he left the Medicae block.
May he protect.
Butcher replied, still bemused but starting to feel euphoric. He approached the slab to run his finger through the blood. It was dark, thick, arterial. The wounds should have killed him. That trooper had been dead. He'd seen it with his own eyes. Dead. And now he was back, and more devout and determined to serve the Imperium than ever.
Am I a living saint?
Butcher asked himself aloud, stopping to marvel at his hands, his miracle-working hands.
A vessel of the Divine Emperor?
He laughed, mildly hysterical, and thought again about his alcohol consumption. Then he heard something rattling in another surgical dish. Cautiously, but with growing interest, he tracked down the disturbance to a heart. Impossibly, it was separate from its former owner, but still beating. There were more bodies in the Medicae, cooling but not yet cold. Butcher looked at his hands again.
A vessel of the Divine Emperor.
And then he got to work. He toiled tirelessly, stitching up the dead, filling them with animated body parts. Lungs, hearts, intestines, every organ gently pulsing in his sainted hands. He had no shortage of supplies. The death toll of the war to that point had been egregious. One by one, the men arose, alive, vital and eager for the fight. 7 casualties, torn apart by mortar bombardment with little hope of recovery, became 7 infantrymen, ready for the meat grinder. Then 7 more. And so it went. Butcher was jubilant. Truly, he'd been touched by the Emperor's grace and given a healing gift. None left his care in a corpse bag now. Every trooper, no matter the severity of their injuries, was patched up and sent back into the fight. On the 3rd week of this miraculous turnaround, Butcher received a visitor.
Wrenhouse?
The sour look on his face said it all, as he regarded the corpse man who obviously coveted the Medicae position.
Dr. Butcher,
said Wrenhouse, and stepped aside crisply to admit Colonel Rake.
Sir!
Both medical men snapped a salute, heels clicking together in the same motion. Rake waved away the formality. He was a stout man, broad of shoulder, not wiry like Butcher, but strong, and born into military service. Butcher had never seen him out of his uniform, which was always pristine, in the crimson and grey of the Valgast 66th.
You're to be commended, Butcher.
Rake began.
Fine work you're doing here.
The colonel looked around, as if taking in the scene of the Medicae's recent triumphs.
Fine work.
Thank you, sir. I serve at the Emperor's grace.
Butcher replied with a short, reverential bow to his commanding officer.
As do we all. As do we all.
Rake straightened his uniform, his eyes firm as he regarded the Medicae.
You're to receive help, Butcher.
He said, and gestured to Wrenhouse. Butcher clenched his jaw so tightly he almost broke a tooth. His heart drummed so loudly that he feared that Rake would hear it. After a few seconds, he dragged out a sentence.
Sir, that really is unnecessary. I can...
Nonsense, Butcher.
Rake cut in.
You've practically patched up half the regiment. More even. We're still in this fight because of you.
Panic came swift and cold in the wake of Butcher's anger. He felt suddenly feverish, his head throbbing, a whiny tinnitus forcing his eyes to narrow. Sweat slicked the back of his neck and he scratched at the wound, reopening the scab. The pain brought him to his senses. He garbled before the ceiling shook. Motes of dust descended earthward like little clouds of minuscule flies. Another mortar barrage had hit, providing a timely reminder of the war Butcher actively wanted to avoid. It was an ever-present companion, the faraway sound of war. Butcher felt it creeping closer. He had not known he was partly responsible for its perpetuation. It was that, or death at the hands of the enemy, he supposed. Rake raised his eyes to the ceiling, scowling.
Those heretic scum are hanging on too. It's attritional, Butcher,
he said, fixing the Medicae with the rapier point of his gaze.
And one thing wins a war of attrition. Men, blood, flesh and bodies, Butcher. Do you understand?
Butcher nodded dully.
Yes, sir, but how does...
Wrenhouse will assist you. Whatever you're doing, teach him to do it too. Think what you could accomplish, with twice the manpower.
Rake went on.
We'll have this war won, in a matter of months.
Months?
Asked Butcher, his gaze flickering to Wrenhouse, who looked studiously neutral, and then back to Rake, who appeared inordinately pleased with himself. How can I keep this up for months? He asked himself. A cold knife of dread slid into Butcher's back as he suddenly grappled with the full import of what Rake was saying. In the privacy of his own sanctum, his work had felt divine, righteous, but Wrenhouse tainted that. Butcher could not risk exposure. His gift might be denied to him, to the men he would otherwise save. He walked a tightrope, and the weight of Rake's words threatened to unseat him and send him tumbling to oblivion.
Sir, I'm sure the corpse man could be better employed.
A flash of suppressed anger lit the colonel's face like a muzzle flare.
Are you questioning a direct order, Butcher?
No, sir, of course not. I just believe...
He didn't have the will to fight it. That old spineless wastrel that Butcher knew he was took over again, and he crumpled like a broken kite.
Very good,
said Rake.
The regiment is making another push at dawn.
He checked his chrono.
That's 4 hours from now. I expect it to be bloody. You'll be glad of the corpse man's help then.
I am ready to assist in any way, Doctor,
said Wrenhouse. You obsequious little cretin, Butcher thought. He felt a sudden urge to bury a scalpel in the corpse man's face and keep churning until he was red and raw and bleed. He stopped himself. Blood dripped from his clenched fist, the scalpel blade having taken its fill without him realizing. He deftly clasped his hands behind his back to hide the wound.
We should prepare then,
said Butcher, and Rake gave him a curt nod.
You know,
Rake said as he was leaving,
I once thought you were a weak, ineffectual man. I expected to have to throw you back onto the line with the rest of the regiment, but you have proved me wrong.
Thank you, sir,
said Butcher, feeling the heat resurge. But Rake had already taken his leave. He glared at Wrenhouse before hurrying to the basin to wash his cut hands and patch them back up.
Doctor!
The corpse man sounded alarmed as he followed Butcher.
Are you injured?
It's nothing,
said Butcher, running the water over his hands as he caught Renhouse's reflection behind him in the grimy mirror. A crack ran down the glass, cutting the corpseman's mirrored face in two. Butcher imagined smashing his skull repeatedly against the glass until his face collapsed entirely and nothing remained but a gaping red maw, and then he'd grind the... Butcher blinked, blood boiling, and took a deep breath.
You look weary, Doctor. Perhaps you should rest. I can take care.
I'm fine.
Snapped Butcher, then repeated himself more calmly when he saw how pale Renhouse looked.
I'm fine. Thank you, corpseman.
Renhouse was young, eager. A thin wash of stubble peppered his skin, but it was soft and fair. In the corpseman, Butcher saw everything he wasn't. Competent, hopeful, devout. Butcher saw his replacement. His tongue felt dry, thick like a wad of cloth. He wanted to be sick. Butcher pushed the feeling down, blaming it on his fatigue. He had barely eaten or slept in the last 3 weeks, so consumed was he with his work. His gift. A kernel of fear knotted in his gut as he realized there'd be no more of that. He couldn't risk it.
Patch them up,
said Butcher, still staring at his reflection, wafting a hand vaguely at the 2 flesh wounds that had just come in.
At once, Doctor,
said Renhouse, moving swiftly to his post.
I will prove my worth. I swear it by the Emperor.
May he protect,
murmured Butcher, and reached for a low stick. The next few days were bloody. Rake's promised push brought fresh wounded by the score and turned the Medicaid block into a charnel house. The bodies stacked up like sandbags in a defensive redoubt. The stench of death and rot pervaded everything.
Clamp it, Renhouse,
snapped Butcher, the trooper's chest cavity filling up like a red well.
I can't see a damn thing in here.
Renhouse fumbled in the gory morass of the trooper's innards. Butcher was trying to tie off his stitches, which were slipshod at best, one hand on the needle, the other holding the screaming missile loader down.
Throne! Renhouse! Will you please?
I've got it.
The corpseman started calmly draining the fluid.
You nicked a second artery when you cut him,
he said. Butcher glared. Renhouse looked grey, like funeral ash, and dark rings circled his eyes like little pits of darkness. Butcher had jabbed a syringe of morphia into the missile loader, and it settled the trooper right down. But his chest still moved feverishly, like a scared rodent caught in a trap. No longer needing to hold the patient steady, Butcher stabbed a finger at the corpseman.
I did not,
he said, his voice dangerously level.
With respect, Doctor.
Now you listen to me, Renhouse. I run this Medicaid. Me, not you. Ever since you got here, you've been a hindrance. 3 days of this and we're losing every other soul. That's 1 in every 2, corpseman. What do you say to that?
Renhouse only half listened. His attention was on his task, draining the wound, clamping the rogue artery. He only looked up when the rapid chest movements came to an abrupt halt.
He's dead,
he announced, exhausted, and sagged like a drained water skin. Butcher blinked.
He's what?
Renhouse met his disbelieving gaze.
Succumbed to his injuries. They were severe.
He made the sign of the Aquila.
Only in death. Does duty end?
Butcher looked at the corpse like it was a foreign object. The trooper's eyes were open, flashing like little silver coins of light, where the stark overhead lumens touched them. Blood flecked the face. The body cracked open like a broken egg, fluid spilling and slopping over the edge of the slab.
Is that the last of them?
Asked Butcher, a sudden millstone weight around his shoulders. Renhouse nodded.
For now, at least.
A hollow silence fell, where only the breaths of 2 defeated men and the distant thud of heavy weapons could be heard. Then a tiny beat sounded, faint but discernible in the quiet Medicaid block. Renhouse squinted, canting his head like a hound that had caught a scent.
What was that?
he asked, turning to try to pinpoint the noise.
What was what?
Said Butcher, bleary-eyed and slow to make the connection. When realization seized him, he thrust up Ramrod straight.
I don't hear anything,
He said too quickly, too urgently.
Probably just vermin.
He said, trying to sound casual.
They get in everywhere.
I don't think it's vermin.
Wrenhouse took a few steps, listened. 2 tiny beats sounded, soft like a child's finger tapping against a window. Da-dum. Then again, da-dum.
That definitely wasn't vermin.
Said Wrenhouse, intrepid now, vowing to catch his softly drumming quarry. He gave a side glance to Butcher.
Can't you hear it?
Must be from the guns. An echo in your eardrum, perhaps. Here, let me take a...
Butcher reached out, but Wrenhouse had already moved on and was heading for the organ cabinet where the biological material for transplantation was stored.
Nothing in there but empty, briny jars.
Butcher said, still dissembling, still scrambling. Since his recent successes, the last 3 days notwithstanding, he had begun to run out of intact body parts. Not that it mattered with Wrenhouse watching him like a bloody servo skull. The beat came again, a dull thud, an innocuous little noise but hard to deny. It struck Butcher with all the finality of a gunshot. "Da-dum,"
There!
said Wrenhouse.
You must have heard that.
Butcher shrugged, opting for nonchalance.
This place is always creaking. It's taken a few hits.
Wrenhouse was shaking his head.
No.
He said,
No, it's definitely coming from that cabinet. It sounds like there's something in there.
He edged closer, a poacher uncertain of what was in his snare. Butcher's expression turned blank. A canvas bled of all its color. Wrenhouse had grasped the cabinet's handle and was opening the door.
Be careful,
said Butcher. He reached for the bone hammer. It felt cold in his grip, but something hot inside him urged him on.
Definitely something in here.
Wrenhouse was squinting at the darkened interior of the cabinet, at the strange, ugly shapes floating in the cloudy liquid inside the jars. Only a few were occupied. One was tapping against the glass, half a heart. Its aortic valve enlarging and contracting like a tiny mouth, sucking at the wall of the jar.
Holy Emperor!
Wrenhouse breathed, backing up and making the sign of the Aquila. He sounded scared.
There is corruption here. There is taint.
Butcher struck him hard across the back of the head. Wrenhouse went down like a felled ogrin, bouncing off a gurney rail on his way to the floor. And there he lay, as still as the dead.
Throne, what have I done?
Butcher nearly fell, slipping on the pool of blood oozing from the corpse man's cracked skull. He reached out, debating whether he could patch him up. He could claim it was an accident, he could. Wrenhouse stirred, half-conscious, face bloody. Butcher hit him again, crouching in close and swinging the hammer one-handed until the skull came right apart. Then he swung 5 more times. Gore and brain matter spattered his coat and the Medicae walls. He was practically swimming in it by the time he came to his senses. Wrenhouse barely had a head left. It was just red pulp and bone fragments. Butcher dug a piece out of his face, feeling the sting as he wrenched the skull splinter loose.
Oh, Emperor!
He gasped, chest heaving, heart thudding louder than the artillery batteries outside. They'd hang him for this, or shoot him, or worse. Rake would make him suffer. No way he could spin this. He'd murdered Wrenhouse, bludgeoned the poor fool when his back was turned. He knew though, didn't he? He knew what I'd done, Butcher thought.
Yes, he knew.
Butcher uttered aloud. He would have exposed me. He would have stopped my healing gift.
I had no choice,
he said, feeling calmer. No choice at all. Butcher swapped the hammer for a surgical saw. He got to work. The bone was tough. He didn't bother dragging Wrenhouse onto a slab and just dismembered him on the floor. He cut the narrow joints, the wrist, the elbow, the ankle, the knee. The sheared bone gave off a plaintive shriek. He ignored it, took the partitioned limbs and bisected them. Then he did so again. He kept the pieces small enough to fit. Everything needed to fit. It was hot work, and sweat sheathed him in a cloak of body odor and desperation.
Come on!
He urged himself, the bite of the saw wearing at the web of skin between thumb and forefinger. It began to bleed. He kept at it, praying to the Emperor that no one would come, that for now the injured would wait. It took hours, and when he had finished, his white coat had turned a ruddy pink. His eyes burned, dry from staring. He needed a drink, but he wasn't done. Not yet. Fingers trembling, he dropped the saw and went for the jars, their preservative fluids sloshing noisily as he took them from the cabinet and lined them up on the Medicae floor. He worked hurriedly, unsealing each one, holding his nose against the acerbic bite of the liquid, and then dropping Wrenhouse in, piece by ragged piece. He had just about bundled the last jar back into the cabinet and locked it shut when he heard a gentle tap. Da-dum. An innocuous sound, really. Almost dulcet. Da-dum. But it wasn't dulcet, not soothing at all. Da-dum. It gnawed, like nails raking against glass. Butcher stuffed his ears, trying to block it out. Oh, throne. He could smell the blood on him. They would smell it too. They would know what he had done. Killed a corpse man and then cut him into pieces. Da-dum.
Shut up!
Butcher pressed his ears so hard that he grew dizzy from the pressure against his skull. Blood thundering, he let go. Da-dum.
Shut up! Shut up!
He turned on the medical saw and let it whine, scything the air. Da-dum. Like a parade inside his head, beating out the tattoo of his guilt. Da-dum. Butcher scrambled to his cabinet, slipped and hit his head. Fire burned through his skull, like a dozen hot pins had been thrust into his scalp. He got to his feet, groggy, nauseous.
Please,
he hissed, a plaintive whisper to the dark. The cabinet sprang open on the third attempt, Butcher's fingers raw and bleeding with the effort. He threw aside the doors, exposing his tormentor. The jars were still. Nothing stirred. He waited. He watched. Wrenhouse, his accumulated biological matter, simply floated. Tiny pieces of him had broken off and bobbed around in the briny fluid. It was murky, like dirty seawater, churning with filth. He checked every jar, holding it up painstakingly to the light, examining the cloudy morass within. Just parts, savaged and separated, but just parts. A foot, a piece of jaw, an eye. Oh, holy Emperor, did I really do this? Butcher thought. He slid to his knees, slouching down into the gory matter underfoot, a man melting under the weight of his own misdeeds. He let it cling to his clothes, his skin, begging for the filth to consume him. For a few seconds there was silence. Then his weary gaze caught sight of that mark again. That little rime of mold, a reminder of the boy, his back arched like a bridge of flesh and bone, the path to his agony and horror. Was it a little larger than before? No, it had changed though. One patch had become three, a grimy little triangle of dots. He crawled over for a closer look and was about to reach out when, "Da-dum!" Butcher sprang to his feet. He had left the cabinet open and grabbed the bone hammer on the way up. Its head was still matted with some of Wrenhouse's hair. Roaring, he smashed the jars. Brine and body parts spilled out in a gruesome flood. He felt it touch him, the soft flesh slapping at his coat, the fingers snagging, the teeth biting. A grisly moat of biological matter and shattered glass separated Butcher from the rest of the Medicae block. He laughed, too loud, too hysterically.
Now you'll shut up,
he said, a triumphant, mildly unhinged lilt to his voice he didn't entirely recognize. There was silence then. Blissful silence. No, wait. It was actual silence. Not just the empty echoes of the Medicae block, but outside too. No bombardment. No dull thud of artillery. It had become so constant that now that it was gone, Butcher found he missed the percussive refrain of the guns. Frowning, he carefully edged through the mess he had made. Bits of glass, or was it bone, crunched under his feet. He walked out of the block. Still, he heard nothing. A long corridor led out to the camp, to the trenches. He took it, still listening, still hearing nothing. Blinking, he stepped out into the light of a cold day. The sky looked ill, jaundice yellow with brown smears of cloud, like a dirty rag had been dragged across it with a god's hand. The regiment were there. They were waiting for him. Silent. So was the camp. No guns shook the earth with their thunderous recoil. No orders barked back and forth. No one even moved. They stood before him in their ranks, a perversion of parade ground discipline. The Valgast 66th had changed. Pale skin, sunken eyes, and withered limbs. Ragged uniforms blotched by patches of mold in that same pattern he had seen on the Medicae wall. He noticed Grumman, the Vox operator. His arms and legs had wasted to skeletal thinness, but his stomach bulged, bloated with putrefaction. Languid flies drifted on air that smelled like fever sweat. It was thick. Butcher took a deep breath and gagged. Rake came forwards. He shambled, to be precise.
Sir!
Butcher rasped, fear constricting his throat. Or was that just the stench? Rake smelled bad. Like milk left in the sun or eggs turned rotten. The image of fly-blown meat surfaced uncomfortably in Butcher's mind. Then the silence broke and the beat resumed. Dudum. Louder. Dudum. 24 hearts beating at the same time. A chorus of lungs heaving ragged breaths. The pulse and throb of life, except it wasn't life. Butcher knew that now, faced with Colonel Rake in his malodorous state. His shrunken, decaying flesh, his black nubs for teeth. It was unlife, or perhaps undeath. It had taken them, some kind of contamination.
It was the boy, wasn't it?
Said Butcher, hot tears running down his cheeks. Rake nodded, opening his mouth to reveal a thick grey tongue, like a slug lolling inside, too fat to fashion speech. Black flecks collected at the corners of his mouth, cracking the skin and releasing tracts of watery pus as he grinned.
He had the taint. Something in him.
Said Butcher.
It must have lingered afterwards, after the fire. Emperor's mercy, I did this.
Rake turned, seemingly uninterested in Butcher's confession. Instead, he gestured with a bony finger to the mists beyond the trenches. They were silent too, but figures were moving inside the miasma, bulky, heavily armored figures. Poxed men, the dread force they had come to defeat, advancing unhindered. Welcomed. Two armies had become one. Dudum.
Silence!
Begged Butcher, gritting his teeth against that horrific beat.
Please!
He turned back in time to see Rake's sidearm blur across his vision. Everything went to black. Butcher awoke. His chest hammered, eyes blinking against a sudden flare of light.
Merciful Emperor,
he gasped, feeling the softness of his bed beneath him. Then he tried to move his arms and found they were strapped down. The same with his legs. It wasn't his bed. It was a slab.
No, please.
A rancid gag stuffed into his mouth choked off his pleas. A cold hand pressed firmly against his forehead. He looked up into Rake's face. The regiment surrounded him on all sides, looking down on him as if he were a specimen to be examined. A muffled groan escaped Butcher's lips as he realized the Emperor had forsaken him. Rake nodded. and the dirty scalpel in his hands flashed in the grimy light.